Thanks so much. I think you can all hear me. I've been mic'd up from Nick. Thanks so much, Nick. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, President. And thank you, of course, to you all for still wanting to be here despite the late change. I'm definitely the B team, but hopefully you won't be too disappointed. I want to shout out Senator Eggleton, who was supposed to be here, of course, a lauded and a well-respected international ambassador, frankly, for Canada in so many ways, former mayor of Toronto, so my hometown, as the professor mentioned. And so we wish him well because he hasn't been well recently. So I bring his regards and his thanks as well for your patience with his schedule, and I bring you Canada's thanks for being patient with me as the person who steps in. And of course, it's a great honor and a distinct pleasure to be here at the university, speaking at the annual Benazir Bhutto and Ahmed Ispahani International Lecture. As the professor mentioned, I happen to be of Pakistani descent. And of course, just to give you some context to that, my grandmother was born in Delhi because, of course, it was called British India back in the day, pre-1947. And then during the partition, which itself was monumental, violent, and tragic in so many ways, and yet created two countries. My parents then were born in Lahore, Pakistan. So in a fortuitous moment, I was meant to be a guest with you all, sitting, watching Senator Eggleton speak, and now you have a Pakistani family's son speaking to you for a lecture that's inspired by Pakistani people and, of course, the former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. So to have that kind of be a full circle moment for me, I know I'll be telling my mom and dad, and they'll be very proud. So thank you again for allowing me to step in, because it seems to be a meaningful moment, and sometimes these things, destiny works in your favor. So with that, we have lots of more important things to talk about than my heritage, or as the president and as the professor mentioned, we are here to talk about Canada-US relations, which in recent days, months, well, let's say weeks for sure, if not months, have been not only greatly explored, examined, analyzed, spoken about in news media rooms, in publications, but also at places like Jimmy Kimmel Live, where I've never heard the word Canada so much from a talk show host or a nightly comedy host than I have in the last few weeks. Even, you know, normally you get them in the Daily Show, but now you've got them on all the Jimmys, the Stevens, and I'm sure if Sam B., who was also a Canadian, still had her show, she'd definitely be talking about it on TBS. But here we go. As the folks mentioned, I have the good fortune of being the Consul General for Canada, representing in Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada, which speaks to a pretty big swath of the Southwest USA, but also speaks to the great connectivity and integration that Canadians and Canada have, not only across the US, of course, but once I became Consul General, I learned how deeply integrated that economic and security lens is through the Southwest USA. I'll give you some quick hits before I get into my actual formal remarks, because we have some time, and I know there'll be some Q&A, but maybe this will either help answer some of your cues already, or will give you some inspiration for more cues to come. But Canada is the #1 international employer in Arizona. We are the #1 commercial and private real estate holder in Nevada, and also happen to be their #1 tourist market in pre-pandemic in 2019, spending over $1 billion worth of our good cash. And that's USD, not CAD, because that would have been a 30% drop. So when I say $1 billion, I mean USD, not Canadian, for those folks who track these things or who happen to be Canadian and are feeling like they're losing a few cents on the dollar every time they spend here. And then, of course, in Southern California, and in California in general, we have about 1 million Canadians that live, work, and play in the state. And most of that investment, if you will, and I'll break it down a little more statistically in a few minutes, but that speaks to the great kind of foreign direct investment that even happens here in Southern California, happens to that tune, and we are the number 1, 2, or 3 trading partner, depending on which year you're analyzing that data, or depending on which month that happens to be looked at with California. And so when you think of that Southwest representation for Canada, it is Southwest US, it's quite, as I said, heavy-hitting, integral, and impactful. And it's been a relationship until, for a long time, post-1812. There was a War of 1812, if you know your Canadian history, or US, less in US history, I think they speak about this. But in Canadian history, you're very proud to know that in 1812, sadly, there was a war between Canada and the US, and perhaps sadly for the US, but very proudly for the Canadians, we say we won that war. But we haven't had that war, thankfully, since 1812, and now we sit in a situation which I wouldn't call a war, obviously, but in fact, our Prime Minister did call a trade war, and that's what Jimmy Kimmel said it was too, and if you've heard it on Jimmy, then you gotta say it out loud, you know what I'm saying? So here we are. Look, we are fortunate to be living in Southern California, which is one of the largest diplomatic hubs in the world. I'm proud to be not only the Consul General, but given my tenure at the 7-year mark, I now have the privilege of being the Dean of the Consular Corps in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles has the 3rd largest Consular Corps in the world, after only Tokyo and New York. Tokyo for its international scope, New York for its United Nations base, of course, but then it's Los Angeles. Over almost 100 countries. We're clocking in around 97, 98, and of course the mayor and the governor would like to see more countries represented, but that's a pretty good number to represent. And as the dean, I have gotten to see the great countries that are represented here and the great collaborations that happens on a global scale. And Canada is very proud to convene that kind of global gathering to discuss matters of great import, matters of great economic import, matters of great geopolitical import, but also matters of great global cultural integration and awareness and cooperation import. And at this moment in time of our great history, perhaps not since 1812, I'll be honest, it seems to me at least, and I was born in 1974, so I heard about all the great relationships since 1812, and it's been being enjoyed since I was born, because that's why I'm here, to support and to foster and to really take that great relationship to the next level. And that's what I thought I was doing until just a few weeks ago, until the inauguration, frankly, and until the last 36 hours when Canada and the US have really been at odds with each other. And we'll speak about that a little bit as well. We're living in a period, frankly, as we all know, because many of you are students, so you get to see it from the ground floor, as it were. I remember when I was a student, you get to feel more connected, frankly, to history than even when you're a person like me, because we're far removed from the ongoing dialogue. We're in very formal dialogues. So there's a lot of speaking points and talking points, a lot of things redacted, a lot of things that you have to, even as a diplomat, really be careful about. But when you're a student, or when you're in the academic sphere, you all know that you get to really deep dive into things and really analyze and speak with great candor when it comes to many things in a way that perhaps folks like myself can't even speak. But I think we are still able to say that we're not only living at a fortunate time, or have been, but that fortunate time is being shaken up. There are seismic things going on geopolitically. I'm sure you know that. You all discuss that. Perhaps that's being seen through a microcosmic lens on the campus? I'm not sure. But I know that's happened definitely in Canada, and I know we've had to speak about it as it's gone through the US, Canada, and perhaps the Western world in many ways, what's been happening recently in geopolitical ways. And we thought that perhaps that geopolitical, when we think about Russia's invasion, when we think about the conflict in the Middle East, that would affect us, but that would still be centered there. And now, of course, we are all centered and agonizing and focused on here, the here and now, what is happening between Canada, the US, and Mexico, because this has been one of the greatest trilateral relationships and regions of the world. How do we know this? Well, let me be clear. We've created together as the three countries the wealthiest and most competitive trade bloc in history. Our interconnectedness has been our strength. At over $31 trillion together, Canada, Mexico, and the United States account for roughly 30% of the global economy. To put that into perspective, the European Union's combined GDP is only $20 billion. And when you think of a major nation, imperial nation like China, it is at $17 billion. So since its entry, why does that matter, and what really helped that? Well, it really was started in 1994 with the North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, United States, and Mexico, which helped generate economic growth and raise the standard of living for the people in all three countries, which was immensely important, especially for Mexico, I would say, of course. Since its entry, we've raised that standard, as I said, but NAFTA 1.0, as it was called now, in retrospect, supported the development of an integrated and competitive North American market by providing manufacturers, producers, investors, and consumers with a predictable and secure commercial environment and supply chain. It made Canada, the US, and Mexico, as a collective, of course, and of course we mean that the United States is central to that secure and commercial environment, and in terms of the competitiveness, of course. But together, it's really what launched us into the next level of being a competitive region in the world by giving businesses the ability to leverage natural resources from all three countries, the manufacturing capabilities, the intellectual property, the human capital, and the investment across the continent in a supercharged, integrated supply chain way. That started to take a little bit of a shaky ground during President Trump's first administration. It was called a time of modernizing NAFTA, and so what was started as a North American Free Trade Agreement became the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement in the US. In Canada, it's called the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. And in Mexico, I believe it's called the Trade Enterprise of Mexico, America, Canada. So whichever country you go to, it's called either USMCA, CUSMA in Canada, or TMEC in Mexico. So everyone takes front center in their own capital, as you can imagine. But regardless of what you call it, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, right? So it was the sweetness of that deal that really made these three countries, our three countries, not only friendly toward another, but reliable to each other in a way that we're really seeing those shifts happening now. Yesterday, I wish I could say, a few months ago, but just yesterday, at the stroke of midnight, and again, if you're a grandchild of partition, then the stroke of midnight means something to you a little more meaningfully. If you think about a novel like Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, that midnight moment when things happen can change the world. So yesterday, we saw a historic change in the Canada-US relation With the decision, and of course with Mexico too, but I will lens a little more closely on that US-Canadian dynamic, if you don't mind. But we can speak of what's happened with Mexico, of course. But since I represent that country, I'll speak more about Canada. I don't want to get anything wrong from the Mexican point of view, because of course each country now, in a way, has huddled back to their corners. That decision by the United States to impose tariffs of 25% of goods and 10% on energy imports from Canada, as well as 25% of goods from Mexico. Canada's perspective from the Prime Minister was clear. These tariffs are not only unjustified, and we'll speak about why Canada thinks those are unjustified, but from Canada's point of view, and I would say the World Trade Organization's point of view, given that USMCA was signed not too long ago, they are illegal. Illegal. That's a pretty big word. They're illegal, what the United States has decided to do, not what the United States has decided to do, but what this current administration has decided to do. The administration's tariff against the U.S.'s closest allies and neighbors place our historic friendship that I've spoken about, not since 1812, to a degree of danger that we're feeling now, and putting that relationship at great risk. I don't want to mince words. I don't think I am. I think you get where I'm coming from. I think you get my energy. Economically, disrupting the North American trade bloc will threaten jobs in the United States. Absolutely. Right here at home. I am not an American citizen, so while I live here, I will feel it, but you American citizens will feel it immensely. Not because we want you to feel it, but actually because what the administration seemingly doesn't realize or doesn't believe is that their own tariff policy will make this happen. It's not even about the reciprocity of the tariffs or the retaliation of the tariffs, and we'll get to that because Canada has retaliated and has reciprocated. But, because we reciprocate in friendship, but we also reciprocate when we're getting pushed around. And as they say, or maybe you've heard of in the last couple of weeks, when those gloves hit the ice, sometimes punches get thrown on that hockey rink. And goals get scored, and sometimes, and a lot of times, like last time, Canada did win, at least on the ice. So we are at a really dangerous time, economically. It's at a time post-pandemic. When you think about the Southern California lens, it's post the Hollywood industry strikes. And when you really lens down to how the year started, it's post the wildfires. And I don't even want to call them wild because they were the fires. They weren't just wild. There was arson involved as well, we know that. And so our collective neighborhood, some of you may have felt that intricately. And so I really want to also speak out about the great first responders and firefighters, the women and men who really protected us, but also really our thoughts have gone out to the folks who were affected, the families who were affected. But that relief that we might have thought with rains like this, that relief economically doesn't seem to be coming. We can expect costs for essential items such as food, gasoline, oil, electricity, to rise right here in the U.S. first and foremost. Access to an affordable supply of vital goods, crucial for U.S. security as well when we think about why the administration is talking about that we want to create a secure nation. Well, these tariffs actually contradict that very notion and statement or policy. Canada and the U.S. have always had a robust trading relationship. Canada is one of the world's top 10 largest economies with a gross domestic product of over 2.1 trillion. The World Bank figures have Canada as the second wealthiest nation per capita in the G7, after our great friends, the United States. With our population having just reached recently over 41.5 million, we're also a major source of customers, workers, and partners. Although by California standards, we might just seem like, a neighbor in terms of the population of the California state, or the state of California. This means Canada is important to the United States in a lot of ways, but we are the #1 customer. And you know that old axiom, the customer is always right? It doesn't seem to be working right now, because we're the #1 customer for the United States from a goods and services exports point of view. To put that into perspective, Canada buys more US goods than China, Japan, France, and the United Kingdom combined. I just named some of the greatest nations in history that you would have heard of, that you would have studied. I named China, I named Japan, I named France, and I named the United Kingdom. But guess what? Little old Canada, right next door, gives you more value in an economic relationship, even if we don't get into borders and geography. If we just talk economy alone, it's all about the economy, stupid, has sometimes been said in the history of politics, especially in this country. That's what we're talking about here. Over 2.5 USD billion worth of goods and services cross the northern border every day. And it's not just they cross once, they cross maybe 5, 10, 20 times. Because that's how integrated that supply chain is. Now, maybe I'm telling you all what you already know, but I want to really specifically remind us, because it seems like reminders are necessary. Repetition, repetition, repetition is necessary. This past year, Canada was once again named in California alone as one of the titans of foreign direct investment, in California as one of the top 4 FDI nations in the state, creating jobs, prosperity, and security. California's imports from Canada are crucial to keeping the California economy roaring. We know that. With regards to energy, California imports $922 million per year in crude oil and $607 million per year in electricity. So now when the US imports the crude oil, it gets refined, turns into gasoline and energy, and then gets sold back on the world market at world market prices. So when the current administration talks about a trade deficit, it actually doesn't exist when you do the full math to the end of the formula, or at least to the end of the statement. Because yes, there's imports coming in, but they're coming in at a reduced price, first of all, because that's what friends do. We give each other a break. We don't break the friendship. So, I'm going to speak a little bit more about this trade deficit that seems to be one of the highlightable talking points from this administration. And then, of course, there's recent, especially from Howard Lutnick these days, this is about the war on drugs and the border issues. So we'll speak about that too, because Canada has a lot of good statistics, frankly, and reality checks when it comes to those kinds of statements. The president said the goal is of reducing, as I said, United States trade deficit, including what he calls the trade deficit with Canada. So first of all, and I know we have the great professor here who is an economic analyst. This lecture is co-named for him, and perhaps he agrees with most of the economists, I'd say, that there is nothing inherently wrong with a trade deficit, first of all, for an economy. I want to go through the numbers with you on how the situation with Canada is unique. I think I've at least talked about the crude oil part of it. And that's meaningful because that's where the trade deficit largely lies. Not in crude oil, but in energy exports from Canada, including the crude oil and electricity, which, as we just spoke about, are necessary to the US economic output. The US has had, the statistics are a lot more interesting when you exclude energy, or when you take that, even if you don't take into the sort of the equation that I put it, in the way, you know, if you take out the crude, if you cost the crude oil, you take the crude oil costs, and then you really put the advantages of what's being refined, even if you add the cost of the refinement. But when you talk about the sale of the global, of that gasoline at the world prices, you're actually making money from a US perspective. Even if you don't take that out, and you just say, let's just not talk about energy at all for a second, you will still see the fact that the US now enjoys a trade surplus. So Canada is in the deficit.
But I just said that deficits aren't bad, so frankly, Canada wouldn't be complaining necessarily, right? Because Canadians like to sort of build on facts. Since 2007, the US has consistently had a surplus in manufactured goods with Canada, which stood at US $23.7 billion in 2024. And Canada was the only top 5 trading partner that the US has had with a long-standing trade surplus with in manufacturing, which is one of the core competitive advantages that we have, as I just talked about earlier, in this region, in this trading bloc. On top of that, the US trade deficit was balanced by an important surplus in foreign direct investment by Canada at the tune of $220 billion in 2023 alone. In a post-pandemic world, Canadians invested 220 billion USD, again, I'm going to remind us. And Canada's investment in the US actually exceeds US investment in Canada. Because the US really, if you look at overall Canadian investment, it's $671.7 billion, and US investment back into Canada is $451 billion. Now, if someone asks me from the Q&A, where are you really getting these facts and figures, I'll have to get back to you, but I promise I will get back to you, because Canadians also are very good at keeping commitments. I want to focus on energy and the critical minerals piece, because that plays an important and crucial role in the American energy security. When you think about security, it's not just about, artillery and military and things that go boom. It's about these lights staying on, our ability to move back and forth, transportation, what happens because of that, our ability to commune together because we can go from one place to another. That's what I also mean by energy security. I mean that we're confident that we can get up in the morning and have that cup of coffee, get on the road, get to the metro, get to the bus, get to wherever we gotta go, listen to the news, turn that microwave on, come to auditoriums and speak to this guy ranting and raving about why Canada's so cool for you. This is what's really important. That's energy security. A network of over 100 pipelines and transmission lines cross the border, moving vast amounts of energy back and forth. Minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. You get the picture. The energy supply chain makes North America as a continent more energy independent and less reliant on foreign and perhaps not so reliable geopolitical partners, perhaps even adversaries. It makes us secure from those because we know the adversaries that have energy, that they are only more than willing to get into a supply chain matchup with this side of the world. But that will come at greater costs than just a trade deficit. I guarantee it. I don't even have to guarantee it. You know it. Affordable Canadian electricity lights up nearly 6 million homes, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. Maybe not here, but even California imports over 600 million in electricity, as I pointed out. But definitely when you think of Minnesota, New York State, New England, and as I said, the Pacific Northwest, you're looking at direct electricity energy coming from Canada. Critical minerals. Canada is America's partner of choice, surprisingly enough, producing over 60 minerals and metals, including 21 of the 50 listed as critical by the U.S. Geological Survey. When it comes to crude oil, we'll go back to that. Canada supplies more crude oil to the United States than Mexico, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq combined. Combined. We only have 400 and so odd million people. 40 million people, I should say. Not even 4. I wish there was 400 million. Then maybe the conversation would be a little different. But right now we've got 40 million. So I think that's why the conversation is skewing the way it is from this current administration. But Canada is a top supplier of these energy products, potash at 71%, which is important for agriculture and food security. And we know the kind of world we're living in. Tellurium, which is for solar cells and other uses, 32% you get from Canada. Nickel, steel and batteries, That's where nickel goes, 23%. Uranium, which is obviously nuclear power, 21%. Refined zinc, steel industry is affected by that, 50% from Canada. Niobium, which is key in defense for the defense sector, 26%. Aluminum, or if you're British, aluminium. Automotive and transportation, obviously very important to that, 23%. And germanium, again, defense sector, thinking about that security lens at 13%. So 8 of the greatest things needed are already being supplied in a really friendly environment by Canada, from Canada. With Canada is how we'd like to say it. But I can't say that anymore. Not for now, at least. Hopefully we'll be able to say it maybe even in a few weeks, in a few days, you never know. But currently, I can't say it that way. I can't be too friendly. And usually I'm a pretty friendly guy. The economic partnership with Canada, frankly, has benefited the United States. I'm not quite sure what these statements of Canada's taking advantage of us are trying to get at, especially when you look at the facts and the figures. We've been the closest of partners, and currently this is being refuted and frankly turned away from. So let's move away from the customer relationship side of things. Although, as I've said, the customer I thought was always right, but okay, let's say the customer is pissing you off. Excuse my French, if you will. Canada has two, I know as of yesterday, the United States only has one official language, but Canada still operates in two official languages, English and French, although when I said pardon my French, I clearly know that I did not speak any French when I said that. But we've been the closest of allies. How do I know that? Well, in the name of democracy, if we go back to when Canada has stood side by side with our American friends in the darkest of times, whether we think about World War II, or whether we think about the 70s during the Iranian hostage crisis, it was Canadian diplomats who risked it all to free our American friends. Ben Affleck was able to make a movie about it and win an Oscar for it. But it was because that story was Canadian and American that story really resonated for it to become a movie, to be honest. And in the name of democracy and peace, we joined you in the Korean Peninsula, in the Gulf. And following the tragedy, the terrible attacks of September 11th, we joined you in Afghanistan and took up posts in Kandahar. And on that date of September 11th, 2001, which I'm sure we all are crisply aware of, and it's indelible in our memory. But in the midst of that crisis, that tragedy, those horrible attacks, passenger planes headed to the US were rerouted to Canada. And we were proud to take 45,000 diverted passengers that day. Passengers, planes. We stood side by side with America in solidarity and grief. And all that kind of went up in smoke, frankly, as of that midnight time yesterday. When you think about the global security cooperation, how am I doing? I've got 1 minute left? Wow, I've been going on and on. I'm sorry, we'll get to Q&As for sure. But when you think about us in the global security cooperation, I'll just say that as G7 and G20 members, Canada and the United States have jointly advanced North American interests. We are the only binational command in the world. That means that US troops command Canadian troops, but it also means that Canadian troops command US troops. Canadian officers command US troops, US officers command Canadian troops. The only binational command in the world. When you think of the EU, so collective, so together. Not so much when you think of security. That's us. So, I think I've made my point. Canada has stood with the US on many levels, side by side. NORAD is just one example. Our customer relationship is another example. And our border is just another example. Of which, when you think about that war on drugs, we have less than 1% of fentanyl coming in from the northern border. That's the facts of it. That's the data around it. So again, if this is a real war on that, then we are your partner in that war, not your adversary, or not a willing or a complicit partner against you. So I'm really hoping that Americans, though, understand that this is not a fight between Canadians and Americans. This is a refusal to believe in the inaccuracies and the misinformation, or perhaps the disinformation, or perhaps just the confusion that the current administration has vis-a-vis its relationship with its great friends in Canada. And we are willing, wanting to, and looking forward to being back on the right track. And until then, I hope you believe me when I say, God bless us all, and God bless America. Thanks so much. What the administration's goals are for its own country. I will say, though, that as impassioned as I might have seemed here, because of recently what's happened, ultimately, Canada and Canadians are a rational lot. As I said, we stand on facts and figures. So our reciprocity is not anger as much as it is policy and numbers and strategic. So our reciprocity, we are moving with tariffs on 25% worth of $155 billion worth of imported goods, beginning immediately with a list of goods of $30 billion. So we're very measured as well. So we've named the 150, but immediately it's on $30 billion. The scope of the Canadian counter tariffs, it'll be increased to the $155 billion if the current US tariffs are maintained. So we've made that commitment, but we've also given room for a rethink, if you will, right? Because we understand that, again, perhaps it's confusion. Perhaps it's just the current administration not really either, as I said earlier, believing most economists or not having really done the homework. And Canadians, and trust me, you're all here, we got to do our homework sometimes, whether we like it or not, because homework teaches us things that we may have missed in the initial reading, in the summary, or the Cole's Cliff Notes version of things, right? We got to do a deep dive. So the deep dive for us is that number is immediate, but how it gets enacted is a measured timeline. And we're hoping that measurement and that predictability, we're trying to offer predictability even though we're saying it's retaliatory and reciprocal. But we're trying to offer predictability, of course, to our own supply chain folks, but also to our American friends and partners. I hope that answers your question.
What do you think will be the impact of worsening Canadian and American relations for the U.S.?
Okay, what do you think will be the impact of worsening Canadian-U.S. relations for the U.S.? Economically, it's going to be bad right away, to be honest. You are going to feel, of course Canadians are going to feel it. That's part of the problem. This isn't, while in some cases the administration may hope and think that Canadians would have to give a second thought to what's going on in Canada because this will immediately affect us, we're trying to remind the administration that all of us who live in the US will immediately feel it in our pockets, in our bank accounts, in our paychecks, because our paychecks won't go as far. We already have pricing on food, electricity, and gas, energy. We already have issues with that, right? We're in a high cost of living mode. And the current administration committed to actually making sure those prices were maintained in some way or decreased. That was part of the commitments. Well, these tariffs counter those commitments to the American people. So that'll be the first impact. And then what we're already seeing is that there is a kind of impact, especially for those border states and communities who are really friendly, right? They don't just hang with each other and have picnics. They actually work in each other's land. They cross the border every day. And they're used to seeing their neighbors in a very specific way as a friend and a partner and a reliant partner. That, unfortunately, we're already starting to see is starting to crack and shift I mean, hockey games are, you know, in LA, people don't watch a lot of hockey, even though the Kings have won a couple of Stanley Cups. But across the US, that's a microcosm of that energy. And you're hearing about, whether it's the games in the US or in Canada, the anthem getting booed. And that's not about the anthem. It's about the current administration, the feelings, right? People are feeling their feelings. And then I'll just say it's going to get a lot worse than the Kendrick and Drake beef. You know what I'm saying? It's going to get a lot worse.
Hello, Liz.
My name is William Don. I'm the treasurer of the Malaga team on campus, and needless to say, I haven't had to be convinced of the financial self-harm which my administration is making to itself. But one question I have is that a lot of your speech focuses on this, like the negative parallels that we'll see around us today as an economy with this decision. But a question I have for you is, do we see this reflected in the Canadian economy, or do we see these tariffs that your country is making this decision of making up that negative harm?
Making up that negative harm?
Yeah, are you making up the causalities of my administration? And is it just going to be people around me today that are being harmed by this?
No, it's going to, everybody is getting affected by that. If I'm getting your question, it's happening in Canada, and the Canadians are having a serious, well, first, one thing I'll say is that this has been, and you know, you'll always look for the silver or the zinc or whatever, the platinum lining or whatever the mineral of the day is, right? It's strengthened Canadian unity, actually. That's one sort of causal effect of this, or cause and effect of this, that Canadian unity is strengthened. And Canadians and the Canadian administration, along with its provinces, we don't have 50 states, but we have 11 proud provinces and territories who have their own economies, but their own trade barriers within them, like the states do, right? And we are actively looking to break down those trade barriers to make up for the deficits that we are going to immensely feel quickly. That, in the auto sector alone, Canadians are already feeling it as of midnight. In the auto sector alone, we are feeling the pains. We're feeling the confusion. We're feeling the lack of prosperity. So we have things to do to help our own country. This reciprocity is because there is also a deep-seated commentary beyond the tariffs, if you know what I mean. There have been some real threats to our sovereignty, I'll be honest, from this administration. It started perhaps as a joke, but it's gotten pretty serious. When a joke is repeated over and over again, beyond just the administration, about Canada becoming the 51st state, that's not a joke that we can now laugh off. That becomes a serious remark and a threat to our sovereignty. And while we are the greatest of friends and neighbors, we most definitely are a sovereign nation. As I said, in 1812, that became clear when the Canadians burned the White House down, because there was a war going on. So when we go to battle, we take it seriously, no matter how small you may think we are, not you, but the American administration. You know what I'm saying? I hope that answers your question. I've tried to answer on a number of levels. Okay, thank you so much.
That would mean that the 25% tariffs on Canadian goods are illegal. I'm uninformed on that. Could you go into more detail and explain what makes that illegal?
Yes, absolutely. So when the President Trump, in his first term, renegotiated NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which became the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, it's the newest version of that free trade agreement for the continent. And at the time of that signing, because all three leaders signed off on that, it has a number of clauses which ensure, because in order for it to be maintained as a free trade agreement, there are no tariffs on many, if not all, goods and services that cross the north and southern border. And at the time of the signing, the president himself, the current president who is now the president, it wasn't a Democratic president who said that. He said it was the greatest deal for this country, for his own country, that he had ever signed. So from a narrative point of view, it seems weird. And from a World Trade Organization point of view, which governs global international treaties of trade, it contradicts many, if not all the chapters and all the signatures that were made on that agreement, and currently Canada has taken it to the World Trade Organization to say that these tariffs contravene that very agreement. We add the statement, it contravened the very agreement that the current president said was the greatest deal he'd ever signed. And he wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. So he's, like, there's a lot of thing going on, but that's what makes it illegal, because it contravenes the very agreement that the leaders had signed off, and they didn't, it's not up for review until 2026. So if there are issues with that agreement and you want to take them up, there are clauses that allow for that renegotiation to take place in 2026, which is right around the corner. From a geopolitical and global standpoint, years are pretty fast. So in 2026, we could have easily, and were about to go, because I was about to actually moderate panels on the future renegotiations of this treaty, we could have worked out a lot of things. But to put tariffs on that directly contravene that agreement. So it's breaking the contract, essentially.
Hello there. My name is Suhey Espinoza, Chief Government Relations Officer here at the University of Verne, and I greatly benefited from the very friendly diplomatic relationships between the U.S. and Canada. I attended the University of Ottawa as part of the bilateral agreements,
Amazing.
meaning federal aid and loans transfer over to Canadian institutions of higher education. My question is, given the current state of affairs, where do you see those bilateral agreements with educational institutions between the US and Canada heading?
I mean, there are a number of domestic policies, I think, on education, frankly, that, you know, Canadian institutions are having to understand a little better and see how they play out, because they may affect how things are seen in Canada. But I would say that this current administration, government, if you will, the White House and Sussex Drive, right, between the Parliament and the Executive Office, or the Prime Minister's office and the Executive Office, that is that disagreement. Canadians at large love Americans, and Canadian academic institutions are great partners of U.S. academic institutions, as you just pointed out. I don't see that changing. I don't see faculty, you know, getting angry at each other or having, but I do think there is a real sense, perhaps as this gentleman pointed out earlier, that something domestically is going on as well as geopolitically for the U.S. right now, from this current administration. And that is affecting how our institutions, whether they're financial or academic, or government institutions, to be honest. The public service is also, you know, the reversal, the executive orders around whatever you want to call, you know, inclusion policies or whatever. Though Canada has great policies that are about inclusion and equity and diversity, those are going to be, until further notice from my point of view, very much intact. If those are not intact in the US, well then how does one institution deal with another when one's institution's policies in a way are more, you know, coherent and cohesive versus, that may be issues from a sort of policy to policy, but people to people, I don't see the relationship changing to the negative. I think this is, we're all hoping this gets sorted out a lot sooner, but I think, yes, there are lots of things that Canadian institutions, from a lot of angles and in a lot of sectors, are right now worried, confused, or just waiting out. So you might see more, you know, Canadians are seen as already a bit of a, maybe too patient a lot, because we like to sort of convene and talk about things before, we don't like to move fast and break things, because we don't like to break things. It's not that we don't like to move fast. We like to build things. But so there might be some more patience needed on this side, as we try to sort out what you're all trying to sort out, and as we wait for you to sort it out.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm an alumna from the class of 2015.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. My question is, I mean, obviously, I understand that federal policy trumps state policy in most instances. almost all instances.
No pun intended, I'm sure.
But given your locality and California's stage as one of the world's largest economies, like what are the conversations like from your like your office to probably more friendly senators and governor that we have here in California?
I mean, first of all, let me say that our current prime ministers and your current governor enjoy what I call a bromance, right? They are very in tune with each other. And when we speak of the fires that happened, I was on the call with our prime minister and our minister of public safety, our minister of development, our minister of environment, almost round the clock, and their ministries coordinating calls from them to the state of California, to the governor. And we were right there. It was Quebec's water bombers that were, made the news about how we were helping. And that's not to say, like, I'm not trying to say, like, look at us. I'm saying this is like, this friendship, ongoing alliance and relationship is not shaky at all. It really is a federal to federal issue. It's being played out on a provincial and state-to-state scale because of what's happening. But yes, Canada and California enjoy an incredibly good relationship from my point of view, not only from state to country, from national to subnational, but as I said, from a person-to-person level when you think about our president and the governor. And yes, I have only gotten amazing feedback, of the help we gave during the fires, but that was those great feelings were not just about that. It was about you've always been there for us, was the kind of sentiment I got. And I said the same. Why are we always there for you? Because you've always been there for us. That's just how friends work.
Hi. I'm Rania. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for your talk, by the way. Very informative. So I just wanted to ask, because it's my understanding that your current prime minister intends to resign, and because we've enjoyed such good relations with Canada during his leadership, I feel that he's treading very lightly with Donald Trump's policy currently. And I wanted to ask if you believe that an incoming prime minister wouldn't take the same approach, being that they hadn't enjoyed such a long, successful alliance with us.
Thank you for that question and that awareness. Not everyone is aware of that. Yes, so as of March 9th, actually, coming up this weekend, likely there will be a new prime minister because the prime minister has resigned as leader of the party and thereby, in effect, resigned as the prime minister. Ultimately, he didn't resign as prime minister as much as he resigned as the leader of his party, which made it that fact that, well, the leader of the party is the PM, so now he isn't. So we'll have a new prime minister because we'll have a new leader. And then it is presumed that we will, because there will be a new leader of the governing party, and we work on the parliamentary system, which is very different than the US electoral college system, we will move likely into an election period, an election campaign period where everything will freeze, and then depending on how that election process, depending on which side of the border you're on, comes out to be, we may have another new prime minister. Regardless of that, I'll be honest, all the political parties speak of their frankly hurt feelings from the Canadian side. I don't want to get into that because this is a rational relationship, but because it's a friendly relationship, you feel hurt, you feel betrayed. And so there's definitely that undercurrent throughout each political party in Canada, but that is, like anything, ready to be repaired at a moment's notice, because that's the Canadian promise, is that we are here for the American people and our American friends, regardless of who is in power in our country or your country. But it is those people that have to work this out inevitably. But in terms of the friendship, I don't see that going south. But, right, you have to repair cracks in relationships.
whether they're personal or whether they're financial or whether they're geopolitical. And so, yes, I think we will need to work on repairing that relationship, but I don't see a new prime minister by any stretch of the imagination being more hard-lined than this current one frankly stated out. We've never seen the prime minister in the modern media from Canada look directly into the camera and speak out against the US president. That has never happened. And as I said, I was born in the 70s at kind of before the height of real, the 50s were the explosion of television broadcast, but the 70s was where it really started taking off, where video and being able to record things and being able to really speak about things in a past tense, even though you had that sound bite, that sound clip beyond radio came into being. And you won't find that in the history of those broadcasts ever. This is the first time. So it'll need to be worked on, but because it's in the history the first time, I think it can be worked on. I hope that helps, or answers the question.
Hi, my name is Joey. Thank you for coming out. I'm not very well educated on these matters at all, but so is it?
Well, welcome to class.
Exactly. So it's still currently, Canada and US can still trade with each other, right? It's just at a higher price.
Yeah, you can trade. It's just that it's going to cost and right now, I mean, who knows? The cost is meant to be borne by the manufacturer or the supplier.
Right.
But we are just saying that inevitably, because it's going to cost them more to do business, and if their tertiary part of that relationship is the consumer, inevitably, in history, usually suppliers and manufacturers tend to then pass the cost on to the consumer, which is why we as consumers will feel it. But yes, the cost itself from the tariff is borne by the supplier and the manufacturer on the tariff, because it's their product or their service that is being taxed as it crosses the border.
Understood.
Okay.
So would it be fair to consider this an effort to promote the American economy and just
That's exactly what is being said. That's exactly what the administration says. They are saying, by no stretch of the imagination is the current president saying, I want to hurt the economy, my own economy. He's saying, I'm doing this. The people who voted me in and those who didn't vote me in, he said that very clearly to Congress. I can't say anything that's going to make the other side happy. He said that out loud to Congress last night. I'm not even having to make that up, right? He's saying, this is me looking after you. You don't understand. You don't get what I'm good for you. And I want this to be good for you. I'm doing this to benefit us. So absolutely it's being seen that. The issue that we're saying, and I think most economists have said, and definitely our analysts have said, is that this tariff, because it will be reciprocated, that's great, do it. But the fact is our supply chain is so integrated that at least in the short to medium term, because the president also speaks about the long-term benefits, that in the short to medium term, this will have a devastating effect to the American economy. And this is just me saying, I don't think we live in cycles of long-term anymore, at least since 2020, I'll say that kind of idea of long-term stability in favor of going through short, mid-term pain and devastation. It doesn't seem like the road we want to take collectively, because we might not get to the long term, frankly. We're at that place, whether you think about climate, whether you think about geopolitics. I mean, the president himself in the White House said the words World War III. So, we're at that time, and so it seems a bit confusing, I'll admit, because yes, the president should be taking care of the country's economy, and he says he is taking care of the country's economy. We're just saying, and I think the world is actually telling, because this isn't also a Canada-US issue, tariffs on April 2nd are meant to go on a global scale. That's what the president has committed to as well. That he's saying, why? Because the world has taken advantage of us. I want to make sure America is protected. The world is saying that may not be quite the reality that your American citizenry is going to experience. This glorified moment when the tariffs come and they feel that to the benefit, that isn't going to happen, and that already the stock market almost crashed, negated the gains that had been made since the election. That's what happened in a day. Negated the gains since November 7th. All the gains gone because of two countries. So can you imagine what happens when the domino effect happens? Again, you're sitting beside one of the greatest economists this university in this country has ever seen, so I'll let him explain. I'm an idiot. I'm like you. I don't know anything either, but, he's got you.
is President Trump trying to get more concessions from Canada, Mexico, and Western Europe? He has a degree in economics from Yale University. So he understands economics, and he understands economics is it's a win-win situation when you trade. Any kind of a trade with any country is a positive sum game. Both countries benefit as a result of it. Already this morning or yesterday he announced that he's giving Canada and Mexico one additional month before imposing the tariff on the automobile industry.
Yes.
And I think he's trying to get more concession. And because his theme is Make America Great Again, so he wants to take the top thing and then negotiate and come down. Is that by any chance any reason?
Look, I mean, absolutely, Professor. Again, you know better. I didn't actually, given how he's speaking, I'll be honest, I didn't quite realize that the president had an economics degree from Yale. He doesn't sound like a person who went to Yale to me.
Bachelor's degree.
Yeah, a bachelor's. Well, yeah, anyone can get a bachelor's these days. Anyway, I'm kidding. I'm just saying, like, the folks that I have spoken to at least, and concession is a great word, but now we come to concessions on what when it comes to Canada? I guess that's what Canada's trying to lay out. This idea that we're transposing the argument right now, at least Howard Lutnick did, including today, that this is about fentanyl and the border, about illegal migration. And again, the statistics bear out that at the northern border at any rate, and this isn't about pointing fingers, it's just like, okay, you have an issue with this side, you're saying the tariffs are not about the economy when it comes to us, you're saying it's about our fentanyl issues that are coming into the country. Again, that statistic alone bears out, and we've actually, I went over time so I couldn't speak, we invested from a Canadian perspective immediately when the first tariffs got hit, or the notion of the tariffs even came, $1.3 billion at the border. And we have had, absolutely, and we concede that there have been more search and seizures at the border to the tune that the fentanyl, which existed in a very almost less than 0.5%, just so you know, overall, in terms of the data around that search and seizure of fentanyl, was already from Canada into the US, less than 0.5%. But we've actually done a 97% reduction from that statistic. So we're at like 0.01, if you will, or just above that, maybe, but definitely below zero. So fentanyl, and if anything, there's much more fentanyl coming from the US into Canada, let alone arms, right? Illegal arms coming into Canada from the US we haven't even done the count. And that hasn't even been that's just me giving you another sort of piece of the puzzle, but that's not something the Prime Minister would talk about because that's not what we're bringing into the game, because for us, we're not speaking about issue 3, but dealing it with issue 1. Right? If you have an issue here, let's talk about it. And we have a fentanyl czar now. That's what was also wanted. You don't have anyone that's really looking after it. We have a joint U.S. task force with the U.S., joint Canada-U.S. task force on illegal migration and these illegal drug trade. So if that is the issue, then the concessions from our point of view have been made, and the work is being done. So let's talk about that. But why are you taking a swipe at both countries' economy in order to deal with that? If you really want to deal, if it's about that, then let it be about that, and let's talk about that, because like any conversation, Canadians are ready to talk on that issue. What we're not happily talking about is when that issue gets conflated with a tariff and a trade, because last month it was a trade deficit issue. Canada's treating us very poorly, he said. Historically treated us very poorly. Didn't mention fentanyl. At that time, it would have been great to hear about fentanyl. Said he was treating poorly. So is it that? Is it this? The fact that the goalposts keep changing, it feels like that's part of our confusion at least. And so we're trying to match. Okay, you want to talk about fentanyl? Let's talk about fentanyl. You want to, our prime minister is a boxer. He may have only been a high school teacher. He may not have gone to Yale for economics. But he also, he also didn't have the pedigree that our president got to enjoy. He didn't have the privilege. He is the son of a prime minister. but ultimately, he is agile. And his mental acuity, at least, if not his degrees in economy, are beneficial to our country. And he's willing to jump and go through hoops. But we don't have any hoops left from Canada's point of view. Is that helpful, or you know what I'm saying? Okay, great. Yeah.
My name is Ryan Orr, graduate of ULB in 2000. Ahmed was my favorite professor here, and saw his name, wanted to be here. Now, I think it's a fair statement to say that we are all selling something. It doesn't matter whether we're trying to sell a place as to where we're going to dinner, or what outfit someone's going to buy, or whichever else. And your title still is Selling Canada at the end of the day. So I think there will be a rose-colored glasses that can come through, and I commend you on your love and your passion to sell Canada as well. We just came off an administration that really didn't seem to do much of anything for 4 years. And now you got someone that's coming in, I believe, with a heart to try and make instrumental change, unfortunately, in a very short amount of time. Now, since you're in California, you're in a very safe environment to be able to color that picture towards a candidate or person in office, where it's going to be quite friendly because so many people just can't fathom that the man has the best interest of our country in mind and can't get past that part of it. So while we're trying to talk about business and economics, we're conflating it with feelings and emotion, which sometimes they're together, and sometimes I truly believe that they're separate. So as to how things get addressed, who between the two countries, US or Canada, would have more to gain or potentially lose? And I'll guarantee you this, it's both countries potentially do. But I'm right in alignment with what Dr. Ispahani said in regards to it being more of a leverage tool to be able to get the better outcomes for all parties involved and look out for the American people. And I think that's kind of where some of the message for me got a little bit twisted, because there was so much emotion in regards to your perspective of it that was
Could I give you my stats again with less emotion? Will that help? Because I gave a lot of stats and a lot of numbers.
I mean, it was just, I think when you start
I didn't actually come with a lot of feelings. I agree, I am feeling, because
you know, should.
I'm an actor, I'm a producer, I'm a director, so I have to color things. But I'm not here to sell Canada, just so you know. Canada's already doing its great job. What I'm trying to do...
And for the record, I grew up on the Canadian border, so I love Canada the same. And
I
used to go
agree,
right across.
I agree. No, I'm not, like, I'm saying you want to, let's break out the feelings. So I don't need your love, and you don't need my feelings.
I still love you, and I love your presentation.
Thank you.
I respect and honor that part.
Right? Yeah. I love you. But I guess what I'm saying is, how can I'm not trying to sell it. I'm trying to explain what's happening, and I'm trying to explain, as I said, the short to medium term issues at play. I don't disagree. I actually agree. The president is saying this is to make, quite literally, according to the hat, my country great again, right? So there's no argument from me that this president isn't doing that. You are an American citizen, you get to vote, so you can speak about the previous president, this current president, all you want. I'm saying this current administration's policy seem in the immediate term contrary to that statement, only because how the facts bear out, and the facts have started bearing themselves out with the stock market essentially negating those gains. That's not something, I'm not a stock market analyst. As I said, I'm not an economist, I'm an idiot, right? No, but I'm saying that. You don't have to. I am. Like, I'm saying it without feeling. When it comes to, I'm not even a career diplomat, sir. As I said, I was appointed by the Prime Minister. I'm an actor. Have you seen Team America? See that movie, Team America? Okay. Well, there's a sign where they think, and someone, I'm not going to say what exactly the line is, but they're like, they got an actor to save us? Like in Team America, like you got an actor, like that's who you pick? So like you could easily be like, what is this actor, like is he just spilling some script? Because I could probably be just speaking. But what I'm trying to break down here is that in the factual analysis currently, and in the reality that we live in, these tariffs have not currently, we haven't seen that, like that bolstering of the economy just yet, and these have been placed at a time when we were at an instability of an economy. So to create instability on top of instability, at least in the immediate outset,
isn't a
I love
great
the numbers for the
strategy.
record. I love the facts. I love like being able to know, to see both sides, because sometimes I don't think we would see the other side in the numbers based on what is or is not reported in the news.
Yeah.
So to be able to know those, but be able to pull out some of the jabs in regards
The problem
to
is that I don't think that currently the administration, at least, and maybe others are, but when you hear the president, at least when I hear him, I don't get a lot of facts and figures from him, right? I actually get a lot of feelings from him. That's my issue is...
I was referring more to your presentation.
Oh, yeah, no, I get it. I guess what I'm saying is I'm not sure what facts... I guess I was hoping that I was offering some facts and figures, because I came aligned with a lot of numbers.
I'm in full agreement. Like I said,
Yeah.
I loved the facts. I apologize.
Oh, no, I'm happy to... I don't want to... listen, and sir, just for the... Canada is a very... we have the benefit of actually having a multi-party system. So different points of view, different analyses, political integration. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to speak to all sides. This is not trust me, I'm a liberal government appointee, but by no means am I a card-carrying stooge of any party of any country. You know what I mean? That's not how I'm not a party politics kind of person. What I am is, you're right, I'm representing my country, so I'm trying to explain why you might want to know why we are putting tariffs on this country. That's from our point of view why we're putting these percentage of but we're only reciprocating, right? We're actually not going into our feelings because we haven't elevated the conversation. I think a government that was in its feelings could be seen as elevating the conversation. What we're trying to do is maintain the conversation. So that's why I wanted to just share with you that I'm happy for you to have others' facts and figures. I was just trying to offer you the Canadian side and why Canadians are reciprocating and why, yes, you're right, we feel, but it's also our analysis. Our feelings are based on analysis, at least from our side. But you're right, it's our side. I will give you that. And I concede, happy to concede that, absolutely.
The event, we have an award for Counsul General Sheikh and our beloved Professor Ahmed Ispahani will issue.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much. Oh, wow.
This is a token of
wow. How
gratitude
special. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
We enjoyed it. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And helps towards our critical thinking and
Thank you so much,
so
Professor.
forth.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
again.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, President. Thank you, everybody, for here. Really appreciate this.